Hello and welcome back to our Vectorworks 2026 drafting tutorials. Today we're going to be working on taking the 2D drafting of Studio A and creating a 3D drafting of that space. So first and foremost, open the 2D Studio A drawing that you've done and immediately save it as a 3D drawing. Just give it a different title so we're working in a different file and we don't destroy the 2D drawing that has already been done. Once I've got my new file, I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer that I'm going to be working in. So I'm going to come to my layer drop options menu, show organization dialog box. I'm going to have my theater floor plan selected and I'm going to say new. I want a new layer and I'm going to call it 3D. Click OK. And then in my elevation, it has it at 18 feet because the last thing we did was change the lighting positions layer to 18 feet before. So I'm just going to select that and change it to 0 and enter. And that looks pretty good. I'll say OK. So now here we can see that I'm in my new 3D layer. From here, we're going to start working on the walls, and for that, we're going to use a different tool set. Below our basic tool set, we have our other ones, and this one that looks like a house is the building shell tool set, and the top left corner is the wall tool. So I'm going to click on that. I want to be in left control line mode. The rest of these should be defaults where we want to be, so that's great. I'm going to go ahead and click on my preferences here. So I get my wall preferences, and I want the initial wall thickness is going to be 8 inches. And then I'm going to click insertion options, and I want to change the height of my wall to 20 feet. Once I have both of those done, I'm going to click OK. And then I'll zoom in on my top pillar here. I'm going to go from the onstage corner and draw a line straight down to the bottom corner and double click, and that's going to insert that 20-foot wall. Since there's 2 pillars, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this and then just drag the duplication onto the other pillar. And those are done. Next, I'm going to select the wall tool again and go back into the preferences, and I'm going to change the thickness to 6 inches because the rest of the walls are going to be 6 inches thick. I'll click OK. And from here, I'm going to start in the upper left-hand corner, and I'm just going to trace the perimeter of the room. Once I've got that done, I'm just going to click on my 3D flyover tool and rotate my drawing a little bit so that we can see that I have created my walls. Here are my pillars, and I've finished the first step of that process. I'm going to go ahead and return to a top plan view and save my drawing. Next, I'm going to create some new classes and assign each of my walls to those new classes so that I can affect them individually if I need. So in my class options drop-down menu, I'm going to say show organization dialog box, and I'm going to say I want a new class, and the class name is going to be walls-north. Remember, by doing the dash, I'm now creating a subclass. So the class itself will be walls, and the subclass will be north. And I'll say OK. And I'm going to do that 3 more times for the other cardinal directions. When I'm done, I'm going to click OK in my dialog box. And I'm going to select the wall on the bottom of the page. That's going to be my north wall. So with it selected, I'll come up to my Object Info palette. And in the class section, I'll click on that drop-down menu and expand my wall subclasses and say north. And I'm going to do that for all 4 of my other walls. So this is going to be the south wall. This will be the east wall. And this will be the west wall. Next, I'm going to go ahead and change the rendering texture of my walls. So I'm going to select all of them. I'm just going to drag a marquee around all of them, so I'm sure to select both of my pillars and all 4 of my walls. And I'm going to come back up to my Object Info palette, and then I'm going to click on the Render tab, which I don't think that we have seen before. Here, these are my options. I may need to expand this just a little bit to see them, but here are all the various surfaces of my walls. I'm going to click on Overall and then scroll all the way down to the bottom and click the overall that is under Holes. Now that I've got all of them selected, I'm going to click By Class, and it's going to open up my Resource Manager. I'm going to be sure that I'm in the correct file, and I want to reference the default instrument texture. So I'm going to double click on that. And all of my walls have now changed their render. Because we're in a top plan view, we don't see it here, but as soon as I go to any kind of a 3-dimensional view, we can see that my walls are now black. Next, I'm going to create a polygon that will represent the floor of the theater. So with my polyline tool selected, I'm going to verify that I'm in corner vertex mode. And I'm just going to draw a polygon tracing the inside of the walls that I've created, being sure to go around the pillars. And once I've got that set, I'm going to extrude it -1/4 of an inch. From here, I'm going to go back to my Object Info palette, and in the Render tab, I'm going to select None and click the By Class icon, and I want the default instrument texture again, so I'm going to double click on it. And that will have changed the texture into the 3D view of my floor. From here, I'm going to switch to a back view, which right now is just a black rectangle because I'm looking at the outside of the south wall of the theater. So I'm going to come to my navigation palette, and I'm going to turn off the south subclass. So I'm going to click in the column right next to the eyeball, and that's going to shut that off, and that wall will disappear. And now, if I use the 3D flyover, you can see that that wall is gone, and I can see inside the theater while my floor is still selected. I can't quite see it, though, because it's underneath that specific plane. So I'm going to go ahead and move it up 3/4 of an inch. And now we can see my black stage floor inside the theater. I'm going to go back to top plan view and save my draw. Next, I'm going to work on inserting the doors in my walls. So in my building shell tool, I'm going to come to my door tool. And I just want to make sure that all of these are defaults. They should be just fine. I'm going to come to my preferences to set up my door preferences. And I'm going to start with the width being 3 feet, the height being 6'8". I want the configuration to be swing, but I want the operation to be single. So my door should look like this. From here, I'm going to click OK. And my first 3-foot door is the one in the bottom right corner. So I'm going to take my cursor right to that wall. I'm going to click once to place the door. And then as I move my cursor around, you can see that I can manipulate which direction that door swings. I want it to match the one that I've already done. And I'm going to click again, and my door is complete. I'm going to zoom into the east wall and do that again, because this door is also 3 feet. And I've got that one inserted. From here, with my door tool activated, I'm going to go back into its preferences, and I'm going to change the width to 3 feet 4.5 inches. That's the size of the other wall in the other door in my north wall. So I'm going to come down here to the center of where my door is, double click on that, and now I've inserted a new door. I'm going to go back to my door preferences and do the double doors on the west wall. So I'm going to set my width to 5 feet 10 inches. That's the overall width of those doors when they're both open. And I'm going to change my operation to double bipart. And it should look something like this. That looks great, so I'll say OK. And I'll come over here and double click to install my double doors. From here, I'm going to hold Shift and click to select all 4 of the doors. And I'm going to come up to my Object Info palette and go back to the Shape tab. And I'm going to come down and click the option to Show Open 3D, or Show 3D Open. Once I've got that, if I go to my 3D flyover tool and rotate my drawing, we can see that all of my doors are open and we can see inside the theater. For now, I'm going to go back to a top plan view and save my drawing. Next, I'm going to work on my seating risers and putting some chairs into the space. So to do this, I'm going to activate my rectangle tool, and I'm just going to trace over this horizontal seating riser section was drafted in before. And once I've got the rectangle drawn in, I'm going to extrude it 18 inches. And then I'm going to do the same thing for this little vertical section. And I'll extrude it 18 inches. And then for my steps, I'll do the top step and extrude it 12 inches. And do the bottom step and extrude it 6 inches. From here, I'm going to go ahead and select both stairs and both of those risers because I'm going to change their rendered texture. So I'll come back up to my Object Info palette, select Render, and by class, and I want to search for cloth blue wool, and it'll find cloth blue wool gabardine RT. That's what I want. So I'll double click on that and it will change the texture of those risers. So now if I go to my 3D flyover tool, we can see that my risers are in place and they have their texture. I'm going to go back to a top plan view and work on putting in the chairs. So I'm going to come up to my resource manager and I'm going to search for event chair. And it's probably going to select this event wooden seat. I'm going to scroll up and I want event chair 2. So I'm going to double click on that. And I'm going to come and insert this right next to this staircase. And because I'm doing a symbol, I can click it once to do the initial placement of the symbol. And then as I move my mouse around, the angle of that will change, and I'll click a second time once I have the angle that I want. For now, I just want it to be straight, so I'll click again, and I've got my first chair. From here, to add more of them, we're going to actually do a duplicate array. So I'll come up to Edit, Duplicate Array. I want 8 duplications in this case, and I want my offset on the x-axis to be 1 foot 6 inches and 0 on the y, and I'll press OK, and now it produces those duplications. From here, I'm going to select that first chair again and duplicate it yet again, and then just move that duplication to the other side of the staircase. I'm going to do another duplicate array. This time I want the number of duplicates to be 10. And because I want them to go to the left, it's going to be minus 1 foot 6 inches. I'll click OK, and it puts in the rest of those chairs. Next, I'm going to come to this outside chair right here and select it and duplicate it. And then I'm going to drag that duplication up onto my riser, up against the south wall, like that. Looks pretty good. And I'm going to duplicate array again. And this time I want 23 duplicates, again on a minus 1 foot 6 x-axis because we're going to the left. So I'll say OK. And it puts in my chairs. Now I need to add some to this little vertical section. So again, I'm going to go back to my resource manager, double click on my event chair to activate it. And I'm going to put it right up against this east wall. I'll click once and then just move my cursor till I get it to the correct angle that I want, which is right there at 90 degrees. So I'll click to set that. I'm going to duplicate array one more time. And this time I want 3 duplicates that are 0 on the x and minus 1 foot 6 on the y. I'll click OK, and it puts in the remainder of my seats. Now the seats that are on the risers need to be lifted up. Remember, these risers are 18 inches tall, but since we're putting everything at a 0 elevation, if I go to a back view, you can see that my chairs on top of the risers are not in the correct, have the correct height because they're basically interrupting that seating riser. So back in a top plan view, I'm going to select all of the chairs that are on my riser. And I'm going to come up to my object info palette, back to the shape tab, and I'm going to make the Z be 1 foot 6 inches. That'll raise those chairs up. So now if I go back to a back view, we can see that my upper riser chairs are in fact up on top of that riser. For now, I'm going to go back to a top plan view and save my drawing. Next, I'm going to draft my lighting and sound booth into 3D. So I'm just going to pan over to that part of my drawing. And to do this, I'm going to activate my rectangle tool. And I'm just going to trace over this rectangle that's our lighting booth. And then I'm going to extrude it 4.5 inches. And then I'll do the same thing for the rectangle that is the sound booth and extrude it 4.5 inches. And once more for the little section that is the landing going up to the booths, we'll extrude it 4.5 inches. For this exercise, we're not actually going to draw the ship's ladders that go to the landing and to the booths. We're just going to represent it 3-dimensionally this way. From here, I'm going to select my light booth and my sound booth. And I need to raise them up 9 feet because they are 9 feet in the air. So I'm going to come to my object info palette in the shape tab, and I'm going to make the bottom Z be 9 feet. Then I'm going to select my landing, and I'm going to change its bottom Z to 4 feet. Now if I use my 3D flyover, we can cruise around and see that I have the beginnings of my booth and my landing. Next, I need to draft in the vertical supports for my booth. So I'm just going to activate my rectangle tool again, and from the top left corner of my light booth, I'm going to draw a rectangle that is minus 3.5 inches by minus 3.5 inches. And I'll click to complete that. That's the 4x4 post that is representing part of that vertical structure. I'm going to go ahead and extrude that, and I'm going to make that extrusion be 14 feet. Once I've extruded it, I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to drag that duplication down to where the light and sound booths intersect. And I'm going to duplicate it one more time, and I'm going to drag the bottom on-stage corner here to where the landing and the sound booth intersect. It's roughly right there. Next, I'm going to draw in the masking wall on the bottom of the booth and one of the retaining walls up on the top of the booth. So, for starters, I'm going to activate my rectangle tool, and I'm going to trace this line that separates the lighting and sound booths to make a rectangle, and that rectangle wants to be minus 3 inches on the Y. There we go. And from there, I'll go ahead and extrude that, and I want this extrusion to be 9 feet. Now if I go to my 3D flyover and come around, you can start to see the booth take shape a little more. I've got my 3 vertical supports in, and I've got a masking wall that exists right here. For now, I'll go back to a top plan view to keep working. And I need to draw the retaining wall that is on top of the booth that kind of defines that shape. So I'm going to select my double line polygon tool. I'm going to be sure I'm in right control line mode. And I want my separation to be 3 inches. From here, I'm going to trace the kind of on-stage perimeter of my booth. So I'm going to come across the top part down here, and then come out to the left for this little jog, and then down to the bottom. And I'm going to stop it right where it intersects that vertical support. So I'll double click, and here is my new polygon. I'm going to go ahead and extrude this, and this extrusion wants to be 3 feet. Say OK. And then I need to raise it up so it's sitting on top of those platforms. So I'm going to come to the Object Info palette, and I'm going to make its bottom Z 9 feet, 4.5 inches. Next, I want to go ahead and change the render texture of all of these for when we're in a 3D view. So I'm going to select all of those new components that I just did. So the extrusions that make up the floor of my sound booth, my lighting booth, and my landing, the 3 vertical supports, the masking wall underneath, and the retaining wall up on the top. I've got all of those selected. So I'm going to come back to my Object Info palette and go back to the Render tab, click by class, and I'm going to search for CCW Paint Black. And this is the texture that I want for that, so I'm going to double click on that. And now those surfaces have all been changed to that black color. If I go back in my 3D flyover and come around, we can see that now all of those elements still exist in space, but they are all painted black. I'm going to come back to my top plan view. And the last thing I need to do is draft the kind of glass window section that's on top of the retaining wall on top of the booth. So I'm going to go back to my double line polygon tool. And I'm going to change its separation to 1.5 inches. From here, I'm going to trace that same rectangle, or that same polygon that I did before. So I'm just setting this right on top of that previous polygon that I drew. And again, stopping it at that vertical support. I'm going to extrude this polygon 3 feet as well. And I'm going to come up to my Object Info palette in my Render tab and click by class to change its render texture. So I'm just going to search for glass. And I'm looking for Glass Clear Absorption RT. And I may need to give it a little bit more. Glass clear. Glass clear with absorption RT. That's what I'm looking for. So I'll double click on that, and now it's changed that texture. The next thing that I need to do is actually raise it up so it's on top of that other wall. So I'm going to come back to my Object Info palette, switch back to the Shape tab, and make my bottom Z 12 feet, 4.5 inches. I think the written tutorial says 11 feet. That math is wrong. It should be 12 feet. And I'll hit enter just to make sure that's locked in. And then with my 3D flyover, I'll come back over here and just double check. And yep, sure enough, that glass is sitting right on top of where my booth is. And I've got my theater all drafted out in 3 dimensions, including my doors. I've got my curtains that I did previously, my lighting grid that I did previously, my seating risers in their current configuration, and my control booths. So from here, I'm going to switch back to a top plan view and save my drawing. From here, go ahead and just upload the drawing file to Nexus. You don't need to create viewports. You don't need to export to a PDF. Just upload the Vectorworks file to Nexus, and I'll grade it from there.